Hi, I'm Rhonda Henry. I'm one of the therapists at UK's Work Life Office, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we keep social connection even in a time that we are socially distant. Um, I think many of us recognize that loneliness can have a really negative impact on us, whether that's our emotional and mental health or our physical health. It's not good for us in the long run. And I think that's especially important right now that we find those ways to keep connection. The first things I'm going to that I want to talk about are how we are thinking about this time, and sometimes even that's kind of small shift or reframing how we think about it. It's a good starting point for how we're managing the stress. So, we hear the phrase social distancing. Some of you may have also heard folks using the phrase physical distancing. I find that one a little bit easier to set with because I may not physically be able to be in the room with someone or as close as I'd like to be, but I can still keep those social connections. There's still ways to nurture that part of my relationship with folks. Um, Shifting the idea of being stuck at home to being safe at home. And again, you may have heard other people talking about that or kind of having that shift in how we look at it. I think when we think about the choice of staying safe at home, it gives us a little more control. I'm making a decision. I'm doing this for my own health and wellness. I'm doing this to protect other people in my community. This is in line with my values. This is what I know I need to be doing. Letting ourselves experience gratitude even in difficult times. Sometimes we'll feel guilty that there are some things during this time that might feel okay or that we're not struggling with. I'll talk about that a little bit further in a few minutes. But gratitude for so many things when we're in a time of struggle, gratitude is really one of those effective keys in kind of shifting how we think about things and how we experience them. And then the other part that brings me some comfort is knowing that we're all in this together. That it's not one of us trying to figure this out. We're not isolated in this experience. We all have this shared experience as a community, even if we're doing that and going through it in separate homes or offices. The other thing that I want to mention is, we want to be able to experience difficult emotions during this time, but not get stuck in them. And so right now, it's normal to feel some anxiety, to feel some fear. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world. It is important that we feel that, we can acknowledge that. Sometimes it helps to process that, whether that's with a family member or a friend or a therapist. But we don't want to get stuck there. We want to be able to move through that emotion and be able to process it and move along. We may also find ourselves right now grieving experiences that were lost. I know some folks that have children who are seniors this year who aren't getting to do those sort of anticipated, end of school markers, prom and graduation and those kinds of things. Folks have had to put off their weddings. Folks aren't able to do funerals the way that they would like to. So we can grieve the things that aren't the way we would like them to be. But again, we don't want to get stuck in that. We want to be able to process and move along. So when I talk about communication and just how we keep that connection, an idea came to mind for me, and it's a little silly, but bear with me. So I'm a real fan of hamburgers, and I'm a big fan of veggie burgers. But I always am a fan of veggie burgers because they're two separate things. If I go in to get a veggie burger and I'm expecting it to be an exact replica replacement of my favorite hamburger from my favorite hamburger place, I'm going to be disappointed every time. But if I look at it as I really want to have a veggie burger, and this is a place I like to get that, then I can appreciate it for what it is. And I think when we talk about this, it's kind of the same thing. It's how do we have an open mind to a different way of doing something, in this case, communicating, and appreciate it for what it is. So I need us to all embrace the veggie burger state of mind of it's going to be a little different than what we're used to, but it can still be really good. So when we think about increasing connection, we've got a couple of ways we can look at that. One is we can look at broadening our connections. So that may be things like reconnecting with folks you've lost touch with, being able to get in touch with a family member you haven't talked to in a while or a friend you've lost touch with. We also can look at deepening connections. And in that way, it may be that we are taking relationships that we already have and we're looking for ways to deepen that relationship and that connection with them. And so I think as we go through this, I just encourage you to think about, are there ways that I can broaden the scope of folks that I connect with, or that I can deepen those relationships with the folks that already are in my lives, or my life? So let's talk about some specific ideas for connection. And some of these you may have seen kind of float around on social media, or you may have heard of some other things that people have done. I would love to see comments in the comment section about things you're doing to make sure connection is staying vibrant. And so ideas to connect. First, things like Zoom, being able to use technology and tools like Zoom, FaceTime, I think Duo is the other one for Androids, being able to use things like that to be able to see each other, to hear each other. And to me, it adds kind of a richness to communication because we're not just getting the words of a text, which can be fine, but we're getting those gestures, we're getting the facial expressions, we're getting to see each other's houses or each other's pets or each other's kids. So it just adds, again, that other layer of kind of richness to those communications, being able to plan certain things. So maybe you have a Sunday dinner time, with a group of friends or a group of your family, and that's when you all come together on a routine basis, and you can kind of count on that you're going to see each other. But you may also do lunch dates. If you like to go out to lunch with coworkers, be able to maybe pull that up and do a lunch date that can be really casual and easy, but just gives us the time to again have that connection. It's a good time also for discussion groups, and again, Zoom is a great platform to use for that. But the topic to me is less important than just coming together. So find things that you've got common interest in. It's a good time for book groups. Find a series to binge together. So we're watching this and we're talking about it. We're having a snack, but we're still getting to come together in that social time. Podcasts, my gosh, there's a million of those at this point. Start a podcast with a friend. Listen to an episode, come together and talk a little bit about that. You can also use things like Netflix Party. That's one of the new apps that they've come out with where you can watch something on Netflix as a group and be able to have a chat box going and kind of have that back and forth as if you're watching it in the same space. I really also enjoyed just kind of doing things together with friends that aren't quite so formal. And so, lately I really like to craft. I've crafted with friends lately. And so we've gotten on and some people are coloring or they're making something. And again, low key, but we're just hanging out together in those ways. So think about things like crafting, or maybe when you're cooking, if you got somebody else who lines up at the same time with you, pop your phone up by your workstation and just chat a little bit while you're cooking dinner. It can also be a helpful thing for when you're working out. So a lot of folks really enjoy having that workout partner, whether that's somebody for kind of accountability, whether it's somebody for encouragement, maybe you're working on goals or, trying to sort of one up your game. So maybe that's a time where, again, you can sync that together. So either having your phones on while workout's going on or checking in afterwards and kind of doing a review of that. Thinking outside the box a little bit. But if you miss that working out with people, then we got to find a way to bring that back in. How do we adapt? Another good option is interactive video games. And so I've certainly enjoyed video gaming over throughout my life. And so if that's something that appeals to you, being able to play on platforms where you can interact with other people, where you can chat with them, do team, kind of quests, that sort of thing, there's certainly a whole world of that exists out there. And I think probably you would easily kind of connect with some others that have that same interest. If that kind of gaming isn't really your thing, then think about other interactive games, things like Words with Friends, where you take a turn, but you're playing against a friend and they take a turn. They've got chat features within a lot of those games. So again, it's a different platform to do it in, but it's another layer of connection. And I think with so many of the things we talk about, or I'm talking about today, thinking of it almost like lots of little threads that make up that fabric of relationships. And so it's probably not going to be just one thing one time that's going to take care of that. It's going to be lots of ways that we incorporate communication and connection with each other to make it most productive. Certainly, it's kind of simple things, group texts, many of you may have those already set up with family and friends, but using those on a routine basis, making sure that, okay, do we have everybody in this group that we need to be? Is there a friend that I want to include that maybe wasn't always in this group, and maybe this will be a good way to include them? Thinking also about sort of unproductive hangouts. And so one idea I'd seen that was really appealing to me was the idea of having like a break room set up on Zoom. And so maybe it's one link that's the break room. And if it's among a group of friends or colleagues, whoever's got some free time and wants to socialize can go click on the break room. And if you've also got some free time and want to socialize for a few minutes while you're in between stuff, you can also go in and see, oh, who's there? Oh, this person's there. Let's chat for a little bit. Again, looking for opportunities that don't always have to be with an agenda, with a PowerPoint, with something super formal, but how do we come together in ways that mimic that same feeling we would get in our casual everyday experiences? I think many of us also have folks in our lives that we care about who maybe aren't technologically comfortable or don't really have the equipment to be able to do some of those things. And that can be a little more challenging. I think that definitely can be a time where we can really embrace writing letters, writing cards, sending something through the mail so at least that person is getting a chance to have kind of a brightness in their day. One thing that I did this week was I've got the ability to print photos here at my house. I printed some pictures out for a relative that doesn't have Facebook or any of those things, and I stuck them in a card to her so she could kind of see what we had going on. So again, think outside the box a little bit. Use the tools you have. Send something out. Also, keeping in mind how important phone calls are, especially for folks who don't have access to the level of technology to do video conferencing or those kind of things. A phone call is going to mean a lot. And maybe, and you all can talk about it, maybe frequency is more important than the length of a call. So maybe it's not, we don't need to be on the phone for an hour at a time, but can we check in for 5 or 10 minutes? Just do a little kind of check in on a routine basis. Sometimes I think that can be really meaningful to both folks. All right. Then a few tips when we're thinking about communication, and these are just some things that I think we're all kind of prone to fall into. I think it's important right now to have our conversations not just focus on COVID-19 related issues. Now, certainly, like we were talking about earlier, it might be that you've had a difficult day or you're needing to process some anxiety or some fears or some struggles. That is so important that we come together and do that, but not feeling like that's the only thing we can talk about, that there are other things in the world, that we still exist as people. We still have our jobs, our kids are still doing things, our pets are still doing things. And so making sure that we keep that richness of the variety of things that we want to talk about. I think being really intentional in social media at this point. And so thinking about what feeds you're following, what people you're following. Do you need to mute something for a while? Do you need to unfollow a certain page? Sometimes, we want that outlet of social media. I'm a big social media fan. It keeps me connected to so many people that I just wouldn't have the opportunity to stay in touch with otherwise. And so if we want to keep that benefit, how do we put some boundaries in place so that it doesn't overwhelm us, so that we don't log on and immediately sort of feel like we're just in this tidal wave of difficult information? So that can be done a couple ways. Like I said, it can be unfollowing, muting conversations, that sort of thing. It can also be sort of dividing out your social media, and maybe something like Pinterest or Instagram becomes something that really doesn't touch on current events. And it's the place, Instagram for me is the place where I'm looking for puppies, Kentucky nature, succulents, sewing blogs, all sorts of things for me that are just fun, kind of nourishing entertainment. It's a place that I keep current events at a distance for the most part. So think about your social media. How do you use it? And how are there ways that you can be more intentional in what you're doing with it to make it more beneficial for you? I think too, when we're doing these, Zoom conversations or meetups or FaceTime or phone calls, making sure you've got a private place to talk. And that may seem kind of obvious, but you know, I know for myself, when I go out with my girlfriends, I'm not really wanting my whole family around to hear everything we're talking about. I want to be with my girlfriends and have that kind of special time. Or if I'm talking to my mom, sometimes I just want to talk to my mom and I don't really need anybody else listening in. So, obviously having lots of us home together, that can be a little more of a little bit more of a challenge. Think about where you can have that conversation. Can you go in your bedroom? Can you put something on the door? Just that little thinking ahead can make it so that you can share more authentically, which is going to make that communication feel richer and more meaningful. Um, I think it's also good to have a mix of planned and spontaneous things. So we talked about things like those Sunday dinners, those set times that we can look forward to. But it's also good to have things like that break room or to have just a time where you can text a friend and say, can we FaceTime for a few minutes or can we Zoom for a few minutes? I'm having a rough day. I've certainly had to do that more than once in the last couple of weeks. And I'm really grateful for the friends that have stepped up and been willing to share that moment with me. I think it's also good for us, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, to think about what positive things are coming out of this time. Even in the most difficult circumstances, we can find positives from that. Some of the things that you may be noticing, and some of the things that I'm hearing about from folks, um, being intentional, choosing how am I using my time? Who am I reaching out to? Being purposeful, in that. So it's not just, oh, yeah, someday when I get time, I'll get to it. A lot of us have some time. So what are we going to do with that? Being able to set aside time without distraction. One of the interesting things that I heard a couple of days ago was somebody talking about their child coming home from college and just having hours with them to have conversations and to get into deep conversations and to do fun things together, to be out in the yard together. Things that they felt like as an adult child, they had sort of lost that time in that relationship to have that much time together. But how they're looking at that kind of from a different perspective. It's also good just to remember that we can slow down. We often live lives that are just running from one thing to another. Hurry up and get to the next thing and get the next thing done. Hurry up so I can eventually relax or slow down. We're having to slow down right now. And that doesn't mean that you're not busy in some ways, but it's certainly different. And so using that time to take a breath. It doesn't mean we have to, do everything we've ever planned to do in our homes, but how do I slow down? How do I take a breath? How do I make sure that my priorities, the things that are most sort of close and deep in my heart, are kind of what I'm putting my time toward? And for me, if I think about those things, it's my people. It's my family, it's my friends, it's my mom, it's all these folks that I love. Well, if that's my priority, how do I make sure that they get sort of front and center on that list of what I'm doing that day? I think that our governor has been sharing that phrase about we will get through this and we will get through this together. I think that's for me been a really touching thing for him to say and for me to keep remembering that. And I would encourage you to think about that too. Again, we're part of this bigger community. And when we feel isolated, there are opportunities to reach out to each other. And sometimes it's going to take effort in a different way. It's going to be the veggie burger state of mind where I've got to do it just a little differently than what I used to do. But it doesn't mean I can't enjoy it. It doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. Certainly, if there are other things that we can help with, as I mentioned, I'm Rhonda Henry. I'm one of the therapists at the Work Life Office. We are still seeing clients. We're doing virtual sessions by Zoom or by phone, and usually folks can get in pretty quickly to see us. We can certainly talk to folks about any variety of stressors that are going on, whether they're work-related, home-related, both. Keeping in mind that all of our services are completely free. They're confidential. They do not go in your personnel record or your medical records. What you talk about with a therapist stays with the therapist. And the easiest way to find our information and kind of pursue booking a session with one of us is really just to probably Google the UK Work Life website. So just Google UKY Work Life, and that'll bring our page up. And then within that, you will find information about our therapy services. You'll also find information about our parenting support services, elder care services. We've got a variety of different things that we do to provide support. And you can look through that on that page. We would love to have you sign up for a session if you think that will be helpful. If you're struggling with some aspects of this and aren't really sure, how do I actually get all that in motion? I'm having these, I want to stay connected to folks, but I'm not really sure how to get over this problem or get over this hump. That's a great time to get in touch with one of us because we can happily sit down with you through Zoom and be able to talk through some other ways, kind of brainstorm some ways of taking care of some of those issues. So certainly we are here to help you manage stress or learn new ways of dealing with some things. If we can be of a help, like I said, just Google UKY Work Life. I'm Rhonda Henry, and I hope you're taking care. Bye-bye.